On the radar screen inside Marseille Control, one dot moved calmly across the map. Flight 9525, Germanwings, an Airbus A320 headed from Barcelona to Düsseldorf. The morning sky was clear, the climb steady, the radio chatter routine. Nothing about this flight hinted at the darkness to come. At 9:07 a.m., the aircraft took off. By 9:27, it had reached its cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. Pilots exchanged small talk. Air traffic control confirmed the route. Passengers settled into the quiet rhythm of flight. Then, without warning, the radio went silent. Controllers called again, no answer. The blip on the radar began to sink. A smooth, continuous descent that looked deliberate. Somewhere above the French Alps, a steel door separated two men, one locked outside, the other alone with the controls. In that moment, the skies were calm, the instruments stable, but something irreversible had begun. No distress call, no mayday, only a line of data sliding down the screen and a question that would haunt aviation forever. What happened behind that locked door? At 9:27, the Airbus leveled off at its cruising altitude, 37,000 feet. Everything appeared normal. The captain spoke briefly with air traffic control, requesting a routine adjustment in altitude.
I'll be right back.
At 9:30, he said something casual to his co-pilot, stood up, and stepped out to use the lavatory. The door shut behind him, and with that single sound, the fate of everyone on board was sealed. Moments later, the aircraft began to descend. Not a dive, not an emergency, a controlled, programmed descent at roughly 3,000 feet per minute. To the radar, it looked like a deliberate command entered into the autopilot. Controllers tried to reach the cockpit. First calmly, then urgently. No response. Other aircraft in the region relayed messages on emergency frequencies, still silence. At 9:39, a series of dull, desperate bangs echoed through the cockpit voice recorder. The captain was outside, pounding on the reinforced door, shouting identification codes that were never acknowledged. The emergency keypad could override the lock, but only for a few seconds, and only if the person inside didn't switch the toggle to lock. Inside, the co-pilot had done exactly that. At 9:41, the radar trace vanished from the screen. In less than 10 minutes, the descent was complete. 150 souls were gone, and Europe was left staring at a question that technology alone could not answer. After the attacks of the early 2000s, airlines around the world reinforced cockpit doors. The idea was simple: keep intruders out at all costs. Airbus designed the A320 door with a triple-state switch: normal, unlock, and lock. Behind that door was bullet-resistant metal, a camera, and an electric keypad that could open it unless someone inside chose to block it. In normal mode, the door stayed locked but could be opened from outside with a security code. The system would buzz, wait 30 seconds, and if no one inside objected, it would release for 5 seconds. But the lock mode changed everything. In that position, even a valid code meant nothing. No alarm, no override, no entry for 5 full minutes. It was a design meant to stop hijackers. It ended up trapping the captain himself. When investigators recovered the cockpit voice recorder, they heard the code attempts, the knocking, the shouts. The captain even tried using an emergency axe to breach the door. The sound of metal on metal echoed through the recording. Passengers behind him could hear it too. But the reinforced barrier held firm, exactly as it was designed to. The system had done its job perfectly, and that was the tragedy. A device built to save lives had just made rescue impossible. The captain of Flight 9525 was a veteran pilot, calm under pressure, trusted by his crew, admired by his students. That morning, when he left the cockpit, he could never have imagined that he would never step inside again. Outside the door, his voice was steady at first, procedural, commanding. He identified himself, demanded access, entered the emergency code. Then, as the seconds turned into minutes, the calm turned to disbelief. He banged harder, shouted, even pleaded. The cockpit voice recorder captured his desperate knocks, his words fading under the hum of the engines and the sound of air rushing by. Inside, the co-pilot said nothing, not a word. At 9:39, Air traffic control noticed the descent profile was linear, not an uncontrolled dive, but a steady slope toward the ground. The engines remained powered, the autopilot engaged. In the cabin, passengers were still strapped in, unaware at first of what was unfolding. The terrain warning system began to announce over and over, "Terrain, terrain, pull up." But no corrective action ever came. At 9:41, the aircraft vanished from radar. Moments later, hikers in the French Alps saw a flash of light and heard a low, rolling thunder echo through the valleys. The impact scattered debris across the slopes of the Massif des Trois, an area so remote that rescuers had to be lowered in by helicopter. When the first mountain units arrived, they found silence. Only fragments of metal and papers caught in the wind. The investigation that followed would uncover the black boxes buried under shards of the fuselage, one destroyed, the other barely readable. But the story they told would change aviation forever. The man at the controls was 27 years old, young, disciplined, and once considered a model trainee. He had joined Germanwings with excellent marks, trained at Bremen, then Arizona, then back to Germany. But hidden behind that career was a long, uneasy history of illness that few outside his private circle ever fully saw. Investigators later discovered that in the years before the crash, he had struggled with severe depression and anxiety. He had taken long medical leaves and been declared unfit to fly by doctors on several occasions. Yet aviation medicine operates on trust. Pilots must report any mental health issues themselves. Confidentiality protects their privacy, but it also builds a dangerous wall between personal truth and professional duty. In the days before the flight, he had searched online for cockpit door security, for details about locking mechanisms, for what would happen if the captain were outside. He had also torn up medical notes, declaring him unfit to work, documents found later in his apartment. To the outside world, he was back in uniform, smiling, ready for duty. Inside, something fragile was breaking. On the cockpit voice recorder, there is no evidence of panic or confusion, only quiet breathing as the plane descends. He does not speak, does not pray, does not hesitate. The silence becomes the loudest sound in the investigation. It wasn't just a personal collapse, it was a failure of systems, of communication, of medical reporting, of a structure that had no mechanism to intervene when a pilot lost trust in himself. When the investigation report was released, it didn't just describe an accident, it exposed a paradox. The very systems built to protect passengers had, in this case, prevented anyone from saving them. Within weeks, airlines across Europe changed procedures overnight. A new rule came into force. 2 people must be present in the cockpit at all times. If one pilot leaves, a flight attendant steps in. Simple, symbolic. Yet even this measure raised new questions. What if both inside the cockpit are compromised? What if the system itself remains blind to human despair? Mental health screening for pilots intensified. Germany's aviation authority rewrote its guidelines. European regulators pushed for periodic psychological evaluations and anonymous reporting programs. Airlines quietly began tracking behavioral changes, absenteeism, medication use, sudden isolation. But every step forward brought a new debate. How much privacy should a pilot surrender to guarantee public safety? How far should medicine go in sharing information once sealed by doctor-patient confidentiality? Families of the victims demanded answers that went beyond technical charts and procedures. They wanted to know why no one had seen the warning signs, why no mechanism existed to pull a pilot off duty when he clearly wasn't fit to fly. The reforms came, yes, but they came at the highest possible cost, 150 lives, and a permanent scar in the trust between cockpit and cabin. A lesson written not in theory, but in absence. In the months after the tragedy, flowers covered the small town square of Haltern-am-See home to 16 students who had been on that flight. Across Europe, churches filled with silence instead of song. Every airline captain, every flight instructor, every passenger who watched the news shared the same unease. The door that once made them feel safe had become a symbol of fear. But behind the grief came reflection. The truth was not only about one man's hidden suffering, nor about one locked door. It was about how easily technology can outsmart compassion. The system had obeyed every rule, followed every protocol, and still, it failed to protect life. Today, The crash of Germanwings Flight 9525 stands as a painful reminder. Safety is not made only of steel or code. It depends on the fragile, often silent balance between trust and vigilance, between privacy and responsibility. Because inside every cockpit and every human mind, there are doors we may never fully open. In the end, no system can promise absolute safety. Only understanding can. And sometimes, understanding begins with listening even to the silence. In the sky, as on the ground, every rule is written in someone's absence.